Elena, don't make a scene. My husband said it through clenched teeth while our daughter stood 10 feet away in her black graduation gown, her tassel trembling in the air-conditioned hallway behind the stage at Reynolds Coliseum. A woman from the university's finance office held a folder against her chest like a shield. My brother-in-law Ryan looked pale, sweaty, and guilty enough to collapse. And my daughter, Sophie, was staring at all three of us as if the floor had just split open under her life. "Mrs. Carter," the finance officer said softly, not meeting my eyes, "there's an unresolved balance on your daughter's account." I laughed because it was the only sound my body could make. "There can't be," I said. "We paid 4 years ago." That was when Sophie whispered, "Mom, why is Uncle Ryan crying?" If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My name is Elena Carter. I was 46 years old that spring, a nurse manager at WakeMed in Raleigh, North Carolina, the kind of woman who color-coded medication schedules, remembered birthdays in the oncology wing, and believed that if you worked hard enough, loved hard enough, and planned carefully enough, life might still break your heart but it wouldn't destroy your children. I had been married for 23 years. I had one daughter, Sophie Carter, 22, honors student, stubborn as winter, brilliant as sunrise. She was the first person in my family to earn a college degree without taking on debt. At least that was the story I'd repeated to myself through double shifts, through skipped vacations, through every cheap date night and patched up appliance and postponed home repair. David and I had started her college fund when she was 3. I knew the account number by memory. I also knew, in that moment backstage, that my husband was lying. "Tell her," I said, looking at David. He rubbed both hands over his face, the way he did when he wanted 10 more minutes before reality caught up with him. David Carter was 48, handsome in a tired, respectable way, the kind of man strangers trusted. He worked as an operations manager for a regional bank and wore responsibility like a second skin. He was calm in emergencies, patient with waiters, soft-spoken with older people. For 23 years, I had taken that steadiness as proof of character. I would learn that steadiness can also be where a man hides his cowardice. "It's complicated," he said. Sophie's voice cracked. "Complicated how?" Ryan took a step forward. "This is my fault." "No," David snapped, too fast. "Don't." The finance officer cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, but unless the balance is resolved, the registrar's office may place a hold on release of the diploma." Sophie went white. "Not the ceremony. Not this day. Not after everything." Those words were all I could think while my daughter's face changed from joy to humiliation in front of me. I turned to David. "What balance?" He wouldn't answer. So Ryan did. "The college fund is gone," he said. The air left my lungs so hard I put a hand against the wall to stay upright. Sophie stared at him, then at her father, then back at Ryan like maybe language itself had stopped making sense. "What do you mean gone?" she asked. David whispered, "Sophie." No, her voice rose. "What does he mean gone?" Ryan's eyes filled. "David loaned it to me." Loaned. That word was so obscene in that moment that I almost didn't recognize it as English. Sophie made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a cry. Not anger. Something rawer. The sound of a child realizing the safest place in her life had been robbed from the inside. And then someone opened the stage doors and we heard the roar of the crowd. The ceremony was starting. 3 months earlier, I would have told you my marriage wasn't perfect, but it was solid. David had always had a weak spot where Ryan was concerned, but I thought weak spot meant covering a rent payment once or letting him borrow the truck or helping with lawyer fees after Ryan's divorce. I did not know weak spot could grow into a sinkhole large enough to swallow our daughter's future. Ryan was David's younger brother by 6 years. Charming when sober, persuasive when desperate, and allergic to consequences. He had started a landscaping company, then a craft beer distribution thing, then a consulting operation no one in the family understood. Every failure came with a reason. Bad partners. Bad timing. Bad economy. Bad luck. Never Ryan. David's father, before he died, had made David promise to look out for your brother. It was the kind of dying bed sentence that sounds noble until it's used for 20 years as a permission slip for betrayal. Ryan knew exactly how to invoke it. Every crisis came wrapped in family guilt. Every request came with tears. And David, who hated conflict more than dishonesty, kept surrendering a little at a time. What I didn't know was how long he'd been surrendering. Mom. Sophie touched my arm backstage, grounding me. Look at me. I did. Mascara, gold earrings, the little scar near her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at 8, the same determined chin she'd had since kindergarten. I had worked nights with the flu when she needed braces. I'd picked up Christmas overtime when tuition went up. I'd sat in parking lots eating peanut butter crackers between shifts so she could stay in summer enrichment programs and never know the numbers were tight. I'd told her, over and over, you focus on your grades. We've got the rest. And now we had turned out to be a lie. Can you fix it? She asked me quietly. I looked at David. He finally met my eyes, and in his face I saw the answer before he spoke. No, he said. That was the moment something fundamental died. They called Sophie's row. She should have been lining up with the other graduates. Instead she was trapped in a fluorescent hallway with the wreckage of her family. Then, unbelievably, she straightened her shoulders. I'm walking, she said. The finance officer blinked. I'm not authorized to. I earned that walk, Sophie said. You can hold the paper. You can't hold what I did. There was steel in her voice. My daughter had been ambushed on the happiest day of her life, and still she found her backbone faster than the adults around her. The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. Sophie looked at her father. Don't touch me. Then she walked toward the line as if her heart weren't breaking in real time. I should tell you I didn't scream in that hallway. I didn't slap anyone. I didn't collapse. Maybe I wanted to. But when you spend 20 years in hospitals, you learn that some disasters require motion first and grief later. I watched my daughter disappear into a sea of black gowns, then I turned to my husband and said, you and I are leaving this building after she crosses that stage, and if you lie to me one more time, you better do it from the sidewalk. Ryan started apologizing, but I lifted my hand. If you say, I never meant for this to happen, I said, I might forget where we are. He shut up. David whispered, Elena, please. Not now. When? I asked. After the party? After photos? After she thanks you for supporting her? He flinched. Good. Let him. I went to my seat beside my sister Marisol and smiled through a face that no longer belonged to me. Every family around us was glowing. Cameras up. Flowers in laps. Grandparents crying. Sophie's name was 6 pages away in the program, and I sat there hearing only 2 words in a loop. It's gone. Then there was another problem. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ask David about account ending 4421. And ask him why the withdrawals were made in cash. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Cash? The account belonged to Sophie. We'd set it up as a protected education fund. The idea of cash withdrawals made no sense. My heartbeat turned cold and methodical. Either someone was playing games with us, or what David had done was bigger than a private loan between brothers. I looked across the arena. David was sitting rigidly beside Ryan, not watching the stage. He was watching me. When Sophie's name was called, the room erupted for her. She walked with grace, chin high, smile thin but undefeated. I stood and screamed so loudly my throat burned. For one suspended moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wear my scrubs cap and declare she was going to save people. The audience saw a graduate. I saw a survivor. Then President Holloway stepped to the podium and made an announcement. Before diplomas concluded, there would be a special recognition for the recipient of the Chandler Family Resilience Award, a cash prize for graduates who had overcome significant hardship. The winner, he said, had requested to speak briefly. The winner was Sophie. I turned, startled. She had never mentioned applying for any award. From across the arena, Sophie caught my eye. And for the first time that day, I realized she knew more than she'd told me. That night I learned betrayal has layers. At home, while Sophie locked herself in her room and refused to take off her graduation gown for an hour, David sat at the kitchen table like a man awaiting sentence. The untouched sheet cake from the bakery was still in its box. Balloons drifted near the ceiling, ridiculous and cheerful above the ruins. How much? I asked. He swallowed. 80,000. The room tipped. We had started with much less, but years of disciplined contributions, birthdays from grandparents, interest, careful planning, it had become the one thing I never worried about. A sacred number. I had checked it annually, then less often once David offered to manage statements because of his banking background. I trusted competence. That was my mistake. When? He stared at the table. Over the last 18 months. 18 months. Not one impulsive decision. Not one desperate afternoon. A campaign. A pattern. A long, steady dismantling. You forged my approval? I asked. He said nothing. Did you forge my name? Yes. Sophie had come halfway down the stairs without my hearing her. At that word, she froze on the landing. I think David forgot she was there. Or maybe he knew and didn't know how to stop the bleeding anymore. I meant to put it back, he said. That sentence is the anthem of cowards. With what? I asked. Lottery winnings? Miracles? Ryan had promised repayment, he explained. A property flip. Then an investor deal. Then a lawsuit settlement. Every lie had bought David another month. He moved money in increments small enough, he thought, not to trigger suspicion. He changed the mailing preferences. He intercepted emails. When tuition bills came due, he covered them from bonuses, a line of credit, and eventually a home equity draw I also didn't know about. That last part made me sit down. You borrowed against our house? His silence answered. Sophie walked slowly into the kitchen. So the reason you kept saying not to worry about my final semester, she said, was because you were juggling fraud. David looked up at her, devastated. Sophie, I love you. She laughed once. Hard. That's not what love looks like. Then she told us her secret. She had known something was wrong since winter. The bursar's office had emailed her twice about minor processing delays. She'd asked David, and he'd blamed system errors. But Sophie was my daughter. She didn't let unease go. She requested account confirmations from the financial office, only to find access restrictions. Then she overheard Ryan thanking David at Easter for saving his life again. So she started recording conversations. At first I was shocked. Then I understood. Children don't start gathering evidence unless trust has already left the room. She pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. I didn't know the full thing, she said. But I knew Dad was lying. I just didn't know how bad. David closed his eyes. Sophie pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the kitchen from a recording dated 3 weeks earlier. You said the bank wouldn't notice right away. Then David, it's not the bank, it's Elena. If she sees the home equity statements before I fix this, I'm finished. My mouth went dry. Bank. Why mention the bank at all? Sophie looked at him. What did he mean by that? David's face changed, not with guilt this time, but fear. Real fear. That was when I knew the college fund wasn't the whole story. By midnight, the truth had widened. David wasn't just covering Ryan's debt. He had also been under quiet internal review at the bank. Nothing criminal had been proven yet, he insisted, but there were questions about override approvals, temporary ledger holds, and a client account discrepancy tied to Ryan's failed business. David had used his position to buy time for Ryan on a delinquent commercial loan, shifting reporting dates and bypassing procedures. When auditors started circling, panic took over. He borrowed against our house to patch gaps. He emptied Sophie's fund to keep everything afloat a little longer. He told himself he was preserving the family. In reality, he was setting fire to it room by room. "Did you steal from the bank?" I asked. "No," he said too quickly. "Not steal. David." He looked straight at me then, and for the first time in our marriage, I couldn't tell whether he was more afraid of legal consequences or of me. "I moved things," he said quietly. "Temporarily." I stood up so fast my chair hit the tile. "Get out. Elena. Get out before I say something Sophie can't unhear." He slept at Ryan's apartment that night. Sophie came into my room at 2 in the morning and curled beside me like she had when thunderstorms frightened her as a child. Only now she was 22, and the storm had my husband's face. "What if my diploma is held?" she whispered. "We'll fix it." "With what money?" I swallowed. "I don't know yet." That honesty hurt us both, but it was all I had left to offer. For the next week, my life split into two tracks: crisis management and emotional free fall. I worked my hospital shifts, smiled at nurses, signed schedules, advocated for chemo patients, and then spent breaks in supply closets calling attorneys, credit unions, and the university. I found out the hold applied only to the physical diploma, not Sophie's degree conferral. Small mercy. The outstanding balance was just under $19,000, because David had been managing to cover prior semesters by borrowing elsewhere. We could solve that part, maybe, if I liquidated the retirement account I swore I'd never touch and sold the jewelry my mother left me. What I couldn't solve was the look on Sophie's face every time her father's name lit up her phone. She wouldn't answer him. Ryan, meanwhile, disappeared. His apartment was suddenly, temporarily unavailable. His phone went to voicemail. I found myself fantasizing about seeing him in the grocery store so I could calmly knock cans off an end cap while maintaining eye contact. Then Marisol called with a revelation. "I didn't want to interfere before," she said, "but David came to me in February asking if I thought you'd notice if he took money from your dad's memorial trust." I gripped the counter. "My father's trust?" "The little emergency account he left for you and Sophie." I told him absolutely not. He said it was for a family emergency. I thought he meant medical. I closed my eyes. So he had tried other doors before he kicked in the biggest one. The next twist came from somewhere I didn't expect: Sophie's award speech. 2 days after graduation, the university uploaded the ceremony video. Sophie skipped over her own walk and found the special recognition segment near the end. The Chandler Award Committee had chosen her because one professor had nominated her after learning she worked part-time, maintained honors, and volunteered tutoring foster teens. But the speech Sophie gave wasn't the brief thank you the committee expected. On camera, hands shaking only slightly, she said, "Sometimes the people closest to you make promises they aren't strong enough to keep. And sometimes surviving means telling the truth before the lie becomes your whole life." Then she stopped, looked off stage toward the VIP section, and added, "This award is for every student whose future was gambled by someone they trusted." The camera panned in confusion. Murmurs rippled. I hadn't understood the weight of it in the moment. Now, replaying it in the quiet of our den, I saw David in the audience go completely still. Sophie paused the video. "I did that on purpose," she said. My heart sank. "Honey. No, hear me out." I knew he was hiding something, and I knew his bank president was there because she sponsors the award. I wanted him to feel scared. "Did you know about the bank then?" She shook her head. "No. But after the ceremony, someone from the university messaged me." That someone was the unknown texter. Not a scam. Not a prank. It was Lena Holloway, assistant to the university president and part-time compliance consultant for the Chandler Foundation. She had seen David and Ryan arguing backstage before the ceremony. She had also recognized Ryan's name because a donor on the foundation board had recently complained about losses tied to a commercial project Ryan had pitched. Sophie's speech made Lena uneasy enough to send the anonymous text. Then she sent Sophie something else. A screenshot. A photo of David and Ryan in the arena hallway, taken accidentally in the background of another family's graduation picture. David was holding an envelope. Ryan was reaching for it. On the back of the printed photo, enlarged by Lena, were handwritten numbers and the last 4 digits 4421. The same digits from the text. My husband had brought cash to our daughter's graduation. Why? When confronted, David insisted it was money Ryan begged for to avoid getting evicted. That answer might have worked if he hadn't already burned every bridge between us. Sophie didn't believe him. Neither did I. So we did something I never imagined I'd do in my own marriage. We hired a forensic accountant. Her name was Patrice Bell, and within 48 hours she found what David had spent 2 years trying to bury. The cash withdrawals from Sophie's fund matched, almost perfectly, a series of deposits into Ryan's personal account. But some of those deposits were then redirected into a shell LLC tied to a property near Durham, property that had been used as collateral on one of the delinquent loans David handled at the bank. Worse, one temporary transfer from David's internal override authority had helped conceal a missed payment window that would have forced the bank to report the asset as distressed earlier. It wasn't movie villain embezzlement. It was Messier, more believable, more pathetic. A good man making one bad exception for family, then another to cover the first, then 20 more until the exceptions became a system. Patrice looked at me over her glasses. Your husband may not have intended to steal. But intent won't save him if compliance decides he falsified documentation. Sophie asked the question I couldn't. Can Uncle Ryan save himself by blaming Dad? Patrice's expression said yes. That night David came by to see Sophie, and for the first time she agreed. I stayed in the kitchen while they sat in the living room, though every muscle in me strained toward the doorway. I was proud of you on that stage, David said. Sophie's answer was flat. You don't get to start there. A long silence. Then he said, I know. She asked him the one thing no accountant, no attorney, no spreadsheet could answer. Was I ever more important than him? The quiet after that felt eternal. Finally David said, I thought I could protect both of you. That's not what I asked. I pressed my fist to my mouth. When he spoke again, his voice was broken. In the moments that mattered, I chose the wrong person. Sophie started crying then, not soft tears, but furious ones. Do you know what I told people about you? I told people my dad was the reason I never felt scared about money. I defended you when Mom said you never set boundaries with Uncle Ryan. I built part of who I am around trusting you. David whispered, I know. No, you don't. Because if you knew, you wouldn't have done this. He left without trying to hug her. A week later, Ryan resurfaced with a demand. He wanted to meet as a family before anyone involved lawyers. That alone told me he knew lawyers were coming. We met at Marisol's house because Sophie refused to let Ryan into ours. He arrived looking thinner, humbled, and still somehow manipulative. Some people don't know how to tell the truth without decorating it. He admitted he had begged David for help after his business partner abandoned the Durham project and he fell behind on everything: child support, rent, taxes, private debt. He said he never understood the money was Sophie's fund at first. Then he understood and accepted it anyway. I was drowning, he said. David was the only person who ever showed up. I leaned forward. And Sophie was what? Collateral damage? He cried. I felt nothing. Then came the second twist. Ryan said David wasn't the one who first proposed covering the bank problem. Ryan's business partner, Michael Danner, had threatened to report loan irregularities unless David bought them more time. Ryan panicked. David panicked harder. But according to Ryan, there was proof David hadn't personally profited. Michael kept recordings, Ryan said. Insurance. He recorded everybody. Sophie and I looked at each other. Recordings. If they existed, those tapes could destroy David, or prove parts of what he claimed. Either way, they meant the truth was still incomplete. Where are they? I asked. Ryan hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. You have them, Sophie said. Ryan looked ashamed. I have one. He handed over a flash drive. My hands actually shook plugging it into Marisol's laptop. The audio quality was poor, restaurant noise clattering underneath, but the voices were clear enough. Michael Danner was threatening Ryan over the failing deal. David arrived halfway through. What followed changed the shape of my anger. David said, I'm not stealing from anyone. Michael laughed. Call it whatever helps you sleep. Then David said, I'll cover the missed reporting period. One time. Ryan sells, everybody gets paid back, and this dies. Not innocent. But not gleefully corrupt either. A man bargaining with disaster, convincing himself it was temporary. Then, at the end, came the line that made Sophie grip my hand. If Elena finds out I touched that college account, I lose my family. He knew. He knew exactly what he was risking, and he did it anyway. 2 days later, the bank acted. David was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His bank-issued laptop was collected. News moved fast inside Raleigh professional circles. People who had smiled at our Christmas party stopped returning texts. Shame has a social radius. And yet, in the middle of my fury, grief began slipping in through side doors I didn't expect. I remembered David coaching Sophie's middle school debate team, teaching her to drive in an empty church parking lot, sleeping upright in a hospital chair when I had pneumonia, crying when his father died. Betrayal is cruel because it forces you to hold two truths at once: the person who loved you, and the person who wounded you, are the same person. I hated him. I missed him. I wanted justice. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted the father Sophie deserved to step out from inside the coward he'd become. Real life is ugly that way. The climax came 3 weeks after graduation at the Chandler Foundation Scholarship Gala, where Sophie had been invited to formally receive the award money. She didn't want to go at first. Then Lena Holloway called and said the foundation's legal counsel wanted to speak with us privately before the event. Something had surfaced in their donor review involving Michael Danner, Ryan's project, and a set of gratitude payments connected to university sponsorship outreach. We went. Sophie wore a navy dress. I wore the pearl earrings my mother left me, because sometimes armor looks like memory. What we learned in that private room turned the whole story on its head one final time. Michael Danner had been courting the Chandler Foundation for investment visibility, using university relationships to legitimize the Durham project. When the deal collapsed, he began extorting everyone he could. A compliance review found that the scholarship donor expansion envelope David handed Ryan backstage likely contained cash meant to keep Ryan from fleeing before he signed a statement accepting sole responsibility for certain project misrepresentations. David had planned to sacrifice his job to shield Sophie from scandal if the bank story went public before her degree cleared. It was still betrayal. Still fraud. Still unforgivable in many ways. But it was not indifference. It was a disastrous, panicked, shame-driven attempt by a weak man to clean up a catastrophe he helped create. Then Ryan made the worst mistake of his life. He showed up at the gala uninvited, drunk enough to be brave. In the middle of the awards program, while Sophie stood near the podium waiting to be recognized, Ryan began shouting that David was the real criminal, that the family was framing him, that the kid got her degree, didn't she? The room went silent. Sophie turned slowly toward him. I had seen my daughter wounded. I had seen her shaken. I had seen her cry into a pillow and stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. But I had never seen her look that clear. She walked to the microphone before security reached him. "My father failed me," she said into the stunned ballroom. "But he is not the only reason we're here tonight." Ryan kept talking, slurring excuses, and then Sophie did the thing that finished it. She played the recording from Easter through the ballroom sound system. Not the whole thing. Just enough. Ryan thanking David for saving my life again. David warning, if Elena sees the statements before I fix this, I'm finished. And finally Ryan saying, laughing, it's not like Sophie needs all that money at once. A sound moved through the audience like a collective intake of horror. Ryan's face collapsed. Sophie looked at him and said, with tears in her eyes but no tremor in her voice, "You looked at my future and saw spare cash." Security escorted him out while donors and attorneys and board members watched in disgust. I didn't feel triumph right away. I felt release. The truth, ugly and incomplete and costly, had finally stepped into the light where everyone could see it. Then David, who had been standing in the back of the ballroom unnoticed, came forward. He looked older in those weeks than in the previous 10 years. He asked no one for sympathy. He simply walked to the microphone after Sophie, looked at the room, then at us. "My wife and daughter did not deserve what I did," he said. "No pressure, no loyalty, no fear excuses it. I broke trust in my home and my work. I'm cooperating fully with the investigation, and I've signed over my remaining bonus, my truck, and my share of the Durham recovery claim to repay what I took from my daughter. Whether they forgive me is not something I'm owed." The room stayed quiet. Then he looked at Sophie. "I was supposed to protect your future," he said. "Instead, you had to protect yourself from me. I will regret that for the rest of my life." Sophie didn't answer. Not then. But she did accept her award. And when the Chandler Foundation learned the details, they did something none of us expected. Between the award, an emergency educational hardship grant, and a legal restitution escrow the bank agreed to establish pending settlement, Sophie's outstanding balance was cleared in full within the month. Her diploma was released. The home equity mess would take longer. The marriage mess longer still. Ryan was later charged with fraud-related offenses tied to the project and ordered into treatment as part of a plea arrangement. Michael Danner cut a deal of his own. David lost his job, nearly lost his reputation completely, and spent the next year working under supervision at a logistics company while attending therapy for compulsive rescuing, grief, and what his counselor called moral avoidance, the habit of choosing short-term peace over long-term truth until everything rots. As for me, I filed for legal separation before I decided anything more permanent. Not because I wanted revenge, but because boundaries are what love looks like when trust has been broken beyond words. Sophie moved into a small apartment near campus for graduate school, yes, graduate school. She used part of the Chandler money and part of her tutoring income, and when she signed that lease, she looked at me and said, "This time, I know exactly where every dollar came from." Months later, David came by to help carry a bookshelf into her apartment. Sophie let him. They spoke politely, carefully, like two people rebuilding a bridge plank by plank over a canyon neither wanted to look down into. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a grand speech. It's a series of small permissions. You may come in. You may help. You may tell the truth and have it heard. Nothing more. Not yet. One evening, after the boxes were unpacked, Sophie found me sitting on her floor, exhausted, staring at the sunset through blinds that needed fixing. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled. "I think so." She sat beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. "For a while," she said, "I thought this story was about Dad choosing Uncle Ryan over me." I waited. Maybe it's also about me learning that someone else's weakness doesn't get to define my worth. There it was. The lesson none of us wanted and all of us needed. People will fail you. Sometimes the people who fail you are the people who loved you the most. But their failure is not your ending. What they mishandle, you can rebuild. What they break, you can name. What they hide, you can drag into daylight. And sometimes the graduation stage that was supposed to celebrate an achievement becomes the place where a whole family stops pretending and finally begins to heal. I still don't know what will happen to my marriage in the long run. Real life rarely wraps itself up with a perfect bow. But I know this: my daughter got her diploma, her voice, and her future. David lost the right to be trusted blindly, but he did not lose the chance to become honest. Ryan faced the consequences he spent years dodging. And I learned that protecting your child is not just saving for her education. It's teaching her, by example, that when betrayal comes dressed like family, you do not kneel to it. You stand up, even shaking, and tell the truth. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.